Então vamos lá, gente. Quero dar as boas-vindas.
Okay, so let's get started, guys. I'd like to welcome you all. I'm going to be speaking in Portuguese. We have the translation from Portuguese to English in this session. I would like to thank all of the organizations who enabled this debate with the theme of reformulation of financing architecture to end hunger and food insecurity and malnutrition in all its forms. My name is Henrique Frota. I'm executive director of the Brazilian Association of NGOs, and this year I'm presiding the G20 C20, which is the civil engagement group for the G20. And I would like to thank you all who are here for this debate and everyone that's listening to us as well. I would like to start with a quick introduction, and our day today is divided into two moments. We will have two panels in the debate today, and then after this brief introduction, I will let Paula do the introductions for the speakers. First, I would like to say that the elaboration of civil society for G20 in the theme of food safety and food systems, it's key and central to our strategy. We have a working group in the C20 specific to address this issue, but in a certain way, because the debate here today is about the reformulation of the financing architecture, it's connected to all of the working groups. Specifically, we have a group about fair economies that are inclusive and anti-racist as well, but somehow all of the themes within C20 work with global governance and the theme of global financial architecture. I would like to also talk about the challenge that we have to fight hunger and food insecurity. Based in the last report of the food and safety in the world, we know that in the past few years, we had an increase in the percentage of food insecurity in different regions of the world, with a lot of attention being demanded by the African countries, but also in Latin America and Asia, the developing countries as a whole, they have a similar situation from a decade since the approval of the agenda for 2030. So Brazil's data from last year show that we are still in a situation that's worse than 2013. Even though we had a recovery in the past 2 years, food insecurity, the average and severe, they're worse than a decade ago. Of course, we had a pandemic. In Brazil specifically, we had many policies and laws that were approved with restriction in the investments. And also, this has happened in recently in relation to the investment in social policies in the fight against poverty. And the previous government even denied the existence of these phenomena that ended up growing a lot in the past years. In the global perspective, we have been seeing that this is also an issue of inequality among the countries. So the African region, which is the one that concentrates the most amount of population in hunger and food insecurity, it's also the region in the world that has the most debt. So we have a global population that is almost 41% of the global population living in countries that use their resources to pay their debt instead of investing in health and education. And investment to fight the fight against hunger is even worse. So this is not random. Also in Africa, we have the presence of the most countries that have the highest external debt, and that's where we have a higher concentration of population that has to live with hunger and food insecurity. I know that in our panel today, we will be talking about international taxation, the tax base, the agreements, the Global Alliance Against Hunger. That's a proposal but done by the Brazilian government and the presidency of G20. But also wanted to bring this issue of the external debt to show how this inequality in the global point of view has to do with the structure of our economic architecture worldwide, and knowing that the cost of the debt for the developing countries is much higher if compared to the cost of this debt for the United States or European countries. In the case of African countries, the cost of this debt sometimes is 4 times higher than the cost of this debt for the US, for example. So it's not just about gross numbers, but it's also the cost of this debt and how it hinders the growth of the countries. And to finalize, I would like to mention that it's just not about the inequality among the countries, but also within the countries. And within this perspective, considering the Brazilian reality, Latin American as well, which I have more experience with. We know that hunger is influenced by inequality structures that are not based only in the financial area, a part of the family, but also race, peoples and communities that are vulnerable, like indigenous peoples here in Brazil, the Black population that live in the suburbs in the Brazilian cities. So, how the countries, when they're negotiating better conditions to reformulate this financial and economic architecture, they also need to apply domestic policy to focus on these groups that have more impact in relation to hunger and food insecurity. We know that especially families that have women as head of the family, women that are in poverty, that are vulnerable, and women that suffer discrimination due to race, these are the families that suffer the most, and this impacts mainly early childhood, and this has an effect for the development in the long term, not just for the individuals and societies, but also for the country. I would also like to mention the importance of our debate today. It is one of the main debates within G20 that's being discussed with the countries that are member of the G20. Many of the countries have been addressing these issues, and we hope that we have an advancement, not just with the Global Alliance Against Hunger, but with also other mechanisms, because the alliance is not going to be talking about funding or reformulating the financial architecture. The Global Alliance is focused on other mechanisms of collaboration and solidarity between the countries. So we need to act within the funding for development and financial architecture so we can actually create structural changes. I'm going to give the floor to Paula. I would like to thank you and all of the organization. And I'd like to wish us all a good discussion and debate. Thank you, Henrique. Thank you for opening your session. I'm gonna start presenting myself, introducing myself and the other speakers of the first part of the event. My name is Paula Johns. I'm a sociologist. I'm a co-founder and executive director of the Promotion of Health, which is a civil society organization in Brazil, and we work with public policies to promote healthy environments. We focus especially in the risk factors for non-communicable chronic diseases. I would like to thank everyone who's here, and I'm going to let Fernanda Machiaveli speak, and she's here representing the minister, Paulo Teixeira. And this is a ministry that has been very important in the discussions that we've been having in the Congress about the tax reform, and Brazil is at this moment discussing this tax reform. The first part has already been approved in Congress, and this is a great opportunity for us to bring together what is happening internationally with the agenda we have here in Brazil. I'd like to thank you for your presence here, Fernanda. Fernanda Machiaveli is master in political sciences in the São Paulo University and specialist in public policies and governmental management in administration. I would let you speak a little bit, and I'll introduce the other. Thank you, Paula. I would like to thank you for inviting us to be a part of this debate. And you guys have been doing such a great work with studies and evidences, bringing it all together to help decision makers, including during the tax reform as well. And you guys have been a very important partner during this process. And I like to use this space that G20 created to articulate with civil society and create this intense dialogue with the government in Brazil and other countries as well, so we can have an agenda for the world. Lula president has as his main mission in this mandate to eliminate hunger and poverty. Hunger has been an important theme that we have been focusing on in relation to public policies, but not with the perspective from 20 years ago, but with the perspective within a context that's different because now we have different challenges with climate change and the promotion of health and the challenge to guarantee food, but not just any food. We need to guarantee healthy food that avoids chronic diseases that have been affecting the population and that cause an impact in our health system. And the tax reform is linked to this discussion about the availability and access to healthy food for all population. I think this is what we can share with the other countries, what we've learned, and how Brazil is facing this challenge to while we analyze the rules of the game within the tax system. I would also like to thank the team that has been working with this agenda, Letícia Mendonça, Arnaldo Campos, who have been collaborating a lot so that Teixeira be could be strong, coming in a strong way in the federal government and in Congress as well. So just to share a bit, we are having a structural change within our taxation system, especially services, and the objective is to fund our food system. Our tax system was created in the 60s with a different structure, and nowadays we know that it defined winners and losers, and that's why we need to analyze our tax system as a political system, which involves the project, a country project, and a social contract, which defines who's going to pay more, who's going to pay less, and what are the sectors that we need to benefit. And in this discussion, for us here in the development ministry, the big issue is how are we going to create a tax system that can contribute to building a food system that's healthier, more sustainable, more inclusive, thinking from the production until the consumption. And this we've been looking at this proposal for the tax reform first under an umbrella, and we established three principles that are our guidelines within this moment, which is the detailing of the Constitution. In our perception, we have three principles that are there. First is the articulation of the taxation policy with the food system, and we noticed this when we decide to treat differently the foods that are within the food guideline for the Brazilian population that was created by the health ministry. So the natural foods and minimally processed, they will be paying less taxes than ultra processed foods. In the same way, some of these ultra-processed foods, they will have to pay an added tax. It's a selective tax, and we call it the sin tax. And this is a way to try to hinder the consumption of these foods and ask the companies that are producing these low quality foods the cost that society has to pay as a whole. Another principle that's fundamental is the issue of building a food system that's more inclusive. So thinking about tax fairness, we will differentiate. The great producers will need to pay more than the smaller ones. This is very important within the context of a country where 77% of the producers are family producers, even though we're talking about many people, almost 4 million families that have a small amount of land, but they are responsible for the most part of the healthy foods. And we're talking here about fruits and vegetables and all the natural foods and this variety and diversity within the foods. The family farmers are the responsible ones for this. And the great properties, they concentrate in producing five types of food. And this creates a monotony in our food systems, and it decreases our diversity, and it has environmental impacts and impacts within our food system and our social biodiversity as well. And we have a third principle. So to summarize, we'll be taxing differently the big producers and the smaller producers. And finally, we have a third principle, which I think is very important, which is the issue of promoting more sustainable production models. And this is our main fight at the moment. And we want to create a tax for pesticides according to how dangerous they are. So we need to treat differently the products that are good for the social biodiversity here in Brazil need to be planted, and we want to preserve these ways of production and the forests and all of the biodiversity that comes with this type of production. And these are the three main principles that we're working on and to put into practice during this process. This is a challenge that brings together a lot of efforts: civil society, health, nutrition, agriculture, family agriculture, environmental associations as well, us here in the government and who work within this area. And now we're trying to bring together these efforts in Congress to make these advancements. I think this advancement that was the constitutional amendment based in these principles is something for us to celebrate. And still on this topic, this is already a learning process, and we can share the data with the G20 countries and other countries as well. We are creating our policy pack, which brings together what we learned in different areas. And something that we know that works is that we need to value public policies that are focused on strengthening the actors that are producing healthy foods. We need to value the small producers and family farmers as and peoples and traditional communities as well, indigenous peoples that safeguard our biodiversity at the same time that we're able to guarantee the conditions for a sustainable production of healthy foods that get to all of our population. So I wanted to share these points to say that we are building this together. Civil society has enriched very much our analysis and our positions, and the Brazilian government is very committed to this agenda, and we're open to dialogue with you and to learn with with the experiences from other countries and other challenges that have been overcome already or challenges in common that we have. Thank you, Paula. You have the floor.
Obrigada, Fernanda. Agradeço aí, né,
Thank you, Fernanda,
obrigada aí por compartilhar, né, todas as iniciativas do
for
WWF.
sharing all of the
É um
initiatives.
desafio, né, implementar todo esse
This is
pacote
a
aí de
challenge
políticas
to
e
implement
o nosso
this
Congresso
policy
torna isso
pack,
ainda mais
and
desafiador no
our
momento atual e
Congress
acho
makes
que
it even more
precisa avançar
challenging at the
bastante
moment.
nesse
I
convencimento
think we
aí
need to
do
advance a
Brasil
lot
realmente
so we
ser
can convince
solidário,
them.
sustentável e
So we have
solidário
a
com a
more
missão e o
solidarity
papel das
in
políticas
Brazil, a
públicas
more
nisso.
sustainable and healthy
Eu, sem
Brazil.
mais
And
delongas, vou
the
passar a
policy
palavra
pack
agora
has a
para
big role in
Saulo
this. Now I'm
Ceolin.
going to
Agradecer também a sua
let
presença.
Saulo
Saulo é
have the
coordenador
floor.
geral de
Saulo is
Segurança
a
Alimentar e
general
Nutricional do
coordinator
Ministério das
in
Relações Exteriores
nutritional
e é
and food
coordenador da
safety,
força-tarefa do
and
G20 e se
he's
dedicou à
coordinator
direção
of
da Aliança
the
Global
task
contra a
force in
Fome e a
G20
Pobreza.
and
Saulo, a
works
palavra é sua.
within the Global Alliance Against Poverty and Hunger. Saulo, you have the floor.
Obrigado aos organizadores do evento.
Thank
Desse evento.
you,
É uma honra
Paula,
estar aqui
everyone who
representando
organized this
todos
event.
vocês.
It's a
Só
pleasure to be here
pequeno
with
reparo
you
da
all.
apresentação. Eu não sou coordenador, sou
So I'm
co-coordenador
not
da força-tarefa
coordinator of the
da Aliança
task force
Global
that created
contra a Fome e a
the
Fome
Global
do
Alliance. I am
Godinho, do Ministério da
co-coordinator,
Desenvolvimento
actually.
Social,
My
que foi
colleague Renato
foi
Guggi,
essencial
he's the
nessa
coordinator.
tarefa.
He was
Bom,
fundamental in
o
this task.
tempo é bastante curto, então
So
eu
we
vou,
have
a princípio,
very
ouvir
short
mais
time.
os participantes aí
So
que já
I
conhecem um
will
pouco da aliança.
speak
Eu vou pedir
already,
para
considering that most of you know a little bit about
vocês
the
um pouco
alliance, and I
do
will
estado atual
concentrate
da,
on
do
talking
andamento, da
about
ação da aliança
how
e também
it
tentar
is
tocar um pouco
working
nos
currently
aspectos
and
financeiros.
also
Bom,
mention
a
some
aliança teve
last.
seus documentos
The
constitutivos aprovados numa
alliance
reunião ministerial com o
was
presidente Lula no
had its
dia
documents
24
approved
de
with the
julho.
presence of
E desde
President
então,
Lula in the
se
24th of
tornou
July.
aberta
And
a
since
todos os
then, it
membros do
became
G20
open
e
to all of the
outros
members
países
in
também
G20 and other
para
countries as
adesão.
well
Então,
to
está
adhere
no
to it.
estado atual
So
hoje de buscar
today,
membros para a
we are
aliança,
looking
seja
for
aí no
members for this
seja
alliance,
entre
be
organismos
among
internacionais como a
countries
ONU,
or
seja também
international
ONGs que
organizations
também podem se
from the
associar
UN.
à
NGOs as
aliança
well can
e
associate to,
fundações e outros
they can
parceiros possíveis.
sign up
O
for the
lançamento oficial
alliance
da
and
aliança
any
vai ser
partnerships that are
na cúpula
possible.
de líderes
The
do
official
G20,
launch will
dia
be
18 de
in
novembro,
the Leaders Summit
e
in the 18th of
a gente
November.
está, no momento
And
também, tentando, desde logo,
at
trabalhar
this moment, we
com
have been
plano de
trying
algumas
to work
políticas que nós
towards
consideramos
a
muito
few
importantes e
policies
essenciais
that we
para o combate
consider
à fome e
are
à
very
pobreza,
important and
e entre
essential
elas,
for the
só para
fight
falar um
against
pouco
poverty and hunger.
da nossa
And
eh,
among them,
palestra hoje, né? Enfim, uma dessas políticas foi
based on
escolhida
what our
que a gente deu
minister
especial
said,
atenção
one of these policies
na
that we
construção da
chose
aliança é o apoio a
while
famílias
creating the
vulneráveis.
alliance was the support to
Bom,
family.
a aliança foi proposta pelo
Well,
Brasil
the
pelo
alliance was
reconhecimento da
proposed by
impossibilidade do
Brazil
mundo em se alcançar os
because
objetivos de
we
2 milhões da
recognized
fome e da pobreza.
the failure in the
Então,
world
a gente
in
tem
achieving
retrocedido
the
nessa
SDGs
tarefa,
1
por
and
enquanto,
2,
em várias partes do mundo, o mundo tem retrocedido
even though we
no
have advanced in
combate à
some
fome e à
parts of the world,
pobreza
but
em
overall
relação
we
bastante altos ainda.
have
Os
failed
atuais
in this
dados
fight
são
against
apontavam
hunger
que no
poverty. The
momento
numbers are very high. The more
780
recent
milhões
numbers are
de
talking about
pessoas que passam fome no mundo.
780 million people
O
who
Brasil propôs
live
então
in
essa
hunger every day.
iniciativa
So
da
Brazil
global como
proposed
uma forma
this
de
global
reunir
alliance
governos,
as a way to
instituições
bring together
financeiras,
different
organizações
governments, financial
filantrópicas, sociedade
institutions,
civil, em torno dessa missão de
philanthropic
acelerar
organizations in
a
society,
erradicação
so we can
da fome e da
accelerate
pobreza extrema.
the elimination of hunger and
A
extreme
aliança
poverty.
deve ser uma
The
plataforma de cooperação
alliance must
para
be a
ampliar
cooperation
em escala
platform
global
to
as políticas públicas que
amplify
se comprovam
worldwide
eficazes.
the public policies
Como
that
a
have
Fernanda
been
Machiaveli
shown that
também
are effective, like
já
Fernanda Machiaveli
funcionam não só aqui
mentioned.
no Brasil, mas
We
em
have
outras
not only
partes
here in Brazil,
do
but
sul
in
global.
many
Nós já temos
countries in
várias
the
políticas
global
que são
south. We have
testadas
many
e têm
policies that have bem
evidência
tested,
prática
and we
de
have
que elas
practical
funcionam em greater
evidences that they
escala,
work.
elas têm resultados
Once they are applied in
efetivos
greater
para o combate à
scale,
fome e à
they have
pobreza.
effective results
E a
in
aliança
this
pretende
fight against
também
hunger
unir
poverty, and the
o
alliance
financiamento
wants to bring
público-privado
together public and private funding
políticas que
agents as
definiram o que a gente
well
chama de cesta de políticas, que é
in
pacote
favor of
geral
this,
de toda a
what we
aliança.
call a policy
Em
pack.
torno dessas políticas selecionadas, né, vão ter
And
o empenho
we
dos
selected these
profissionais que se
policies
comprometem
and
com
we will
execução, os
dedicate our
doadores e os
strengths for these
financiadores.
policies and the funding
Um
as well.
estudo que foi realizado
A
pelo
study that
ODI,
was
o
done by
Overseas Development
ODI,
Institute,
Overseas
também conhecido como
Development
INEIC,
Institute, which is a think
que
tank.
está
for the Alliance, and it's been published since the approval of the documents in the Alliance. At the same time, the study was published, and they mapped the scenario of the international funding for the fight against hunger and poverty. I definitely recommend you guys read it. I can send the link later on, or the document itself, so the organizers can distribute to you all. This study showed that even though nowadays we have different funding sources for the systems for hunger and poverty, we still have a huge gap. We lack programs that are specific for the reduction of hunger and poverty. This gap needs to become smaller, especially considering the global challenges related to the climate crisis and the poly crisis. It's called the poly crisis in general. Another element from this study that's very important was the need to fight the fragmentation in the international horizon for the cooperation and development in relation to the funding for the fight against hunger and poverty. We do have the resources, but they are fragmented with many agencies that are involved, many partners and organizations with small projects. And this is not necessarily a problem, but in the end, when you look at the overview, this can become a problem. And of course, we need more resources and better economic mechanisms, be it domestic or international. And like Henrique mentioned, the Global Alliance will not be able to close this gap by itself. The Alliance was not created for this exactly. It's above all an effort to mobilize a political mobilization, but the Alliance was created since the beginning, considering the funding, the financial architecture, and that's why the financial track in G20 has been invited to participate in all of the debates during the creation of this alliance, because we were worried since the beginning about the financial aspects, and we knew of the need to work with this so we can actually get real results from the alliance. In the inception document, that's the founding document, basically, we have many elements that highlight the need of a coordinated action in the financial area, but I will let Thiago Lima speak. He'll be talking after me, and he will be into more detail. Something else that was mentioned before in the creation of the alliance, but it has been mentioned in other forums in G20, is the need for the developing countries need to have a bigger voice in the governance and the use of international financial resources. It's obvious that there's inequality there in the distribution of resources and in the decision making. To summarize, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty is also based off the need of having a fair and inclusive economy. We're here to work together with anyone who's interested, be it government, financial institutions that are international institutions that participate in the creation of the alliance, and private sector as well, to guarantee that the resources can get to the populations that need them, and that these effective programs can be applied at a global scale. I would like to thank you all for the invitation, and I'm available to talk to me. In the chat, people are asking for the link of the study you mentioned. Thank you. I think you're bringing elements that show the intention of this debate to talk about from this perspective of financing, but not just from the point of view of volunteer financing, but thinking about the financial architecture. What is the relation of this architecture with the financing of these initiatives, or the on how they impact how we face these challenges? So these taxing architecture and the financial architecture, they have a great impact. So the intention is to bring this debate here to find the possible ways we can get to the solutions. So since we're talking about finance, I'm gonna call Thiago. He is a political sciences degree, and he is co-coordinator. I don't want to make a mistake again. So he's a co-coordinator in the creation of the Global Alliance, and he's focused on finances. So Thiago, you have the floor. Thank you, Paula. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank all of the organizers, all the people who organized this event. It's very important to be here with so many people who are dedicated to fighting hunger and poverty and the linked causes, which is the current international financial architecture. Paula, sometimes the names in Portuguese and English, they can get us a bit confused. So Saulo and Renato, they are the co-chairs, and I am one coordinator from the Treasury in the task force that has Saulo and Renato as leaders. So my role is to create this bridge between the Treasury to the structure that these two colleagues, they are leading. So I just wanted to make clear. Thank you for making everything clear. So, because I did not know about who had which role. Yeah, it can be confusing, but we can get it all sorted out. And I would like to reinforce, because what my other colleagues said before me, I would like to reinforce that this government is dedicated to fight against hunger and poverty. So we understand that it's unacceptable for us to be living in a world with so many possibilities, and still every day we have so many people going hungry and having problems with malnutrition and multidimensional poverty. These are very complex problems, and we don't have a magic pill to solve it all. They need the articulation of different actors, be it governmental or not. They need a set of public policies and programs that work well, and they need financial policies as well that can offer economic incentive for the actors to move in a way we wish they do, as well as the resources to create the actions, the infrastructure, and the structure that we need to fight this problem. And so even though the Global Alliance, the goal is not to become a fund to get resources for the implementation of public policies, it's still a movement of political appeal for the movements that work towards fighting hunger and poverty. And this is very important because the theme of hunger and poverty, and mainly hunger, I think this has been something that's been naturalized in the past few years in different parts of the world, and they tried to naturalize it here in our country. So to talk about hunger and malnutrition, food insecurity, nutritional insecurity as well, this, and to bring it and to highlight this is very important in the international sphere and within G20 and the guests as well. So we know that the environment of the G20 has its specificities, especially because it's bringing together the greatest economies in the world. It does not represent the totality of the international community, but it is a very important group of countries when we think about the possibilities that the world has ahead to face these problems. And we have been working together with the financial track, and we have been working with them. We've been able to bring this topic to the international debates, and the approval of the alliance within G20, it was approved unanimously. So after a few years without G20 producing any document with a consensus, and also within this complex geopolitical scenario that we have nowadays, with in the geopolitical and geoeconomic areas. So this approval for the Global Alliance is a very relevant result. So within this, the Global Alliance shows the importance, the reformulation of the financial architecture, and we show this in our inception document. So the Global Alliance, and when I say Global Alliance, I'm talking about the G20 countries. They understand that we need the formulation of the multilateral banks. And this is important because a development multilateral bank, when they get money, they can multiply this as loans in up to 4 times. So when one country donates $1, the country is donating $1. And when the international community, they bring $1 to this bank, because of their structure, they can multiply this by 4, and in some cases, even more. For example, in the case of the canalization of the special rights, which is the special currency of the IMF, there's special drawing rights, and the Brazilian government has been defending this as an important way to increase the international resources that are available for the fight against hunger and poverty. So basically, the special withdrawing rights, it's a currency that's used as a reserve by the country. They cannot be used on the day-to-day, but the Brazilian government with international partners have been defending the idea that this currency can be placed in development multilateral banks, and they can be used to increase the possibilities of these banks to offer loans. So in the case of a proposal that was negotiated by the Inter-American Bank of Development and the African Development Bank in partnership, so something of this type could elevate in 8 times the ability of these banks to offer funding for different types of policies, including hunger and poverty. So the efforts of the Brazilian government was very important, so the IMF could authorize these types of operations and developments in this path that are concrete. It's still to come. It's not here yet, but it's a possibility to increase the amount of resource we have available. But we know that just talking about loans can become a problem, especially for the developing countries, because like Henrique said, the developing countries, especially the poorer ones, they are the ones that have a very difficult position because they already have a lot of debt. And so we need to face this debt problem, and this is a complex problem. Like all of the problems we're talking about, we don't have an exclusive solution for this, for these problems. And that's why within the alliance, something that we defend is the importance of increasing the grants so that the countries can better adjust themselves. The document from the alliance also highlights the importance of examining and analyzing the problem of the international debt, but it also brings 2 messages that are very important within the context of our event here. The first message is that investing in food systems that are healthier can be an incentive for the recovery of biodiversity and in facing the climate problems. And if this type of investment is done with the objective of fixing the hunger and nutrition problems, when we face the climate problem as well, we're going to reduce the weight of these systems in the country's budget. And we see nowadays how much the climate problems cost, and usually suddenly. So this is something important. Something else that's very important that the Alliance document recognizes that the investment in multidimensional fight against hunger and poverty, and to invest in producers of healthy food and diverse food. This also impacts the public health problems. And when we do that, we can also reduce the pressure on the budget of the country related to the health system. And people will be able to work more. People will get sick less. And just because of that, they will be less sick. They will be able to work more and work better. And they will be able to pay for anything that they might need health-wise due to the bad food that maybe they decide to eat. So we need to add this to the budget. And one of the things that the Alliance wants to do is to contribute and support the countries that are members of the Alliance and want to invest, develop, or strengthen their public policies that are also following this path. This is a goal of the Global Alliance to strengthen these cooperations. I don't want to take too long, but I would like to bring a piece of data that's very important for Latin American context. And we have seen other data like this. A recent CEPAL study shows that the cost of malnutrition in the Caribbean and Latin America on average is 6.4%. So we spend GDP, 6.4% of the GDP to deal with malnutrition. All the diseases that are linked, like diabetes, overweight, and etc., heart problems. So all of these things that have become common. On the other hand, CEPAL says that when we offer a healthy diet for all the people in need within our region, it would cost 0.5% of the GDP of the region. So what we want to say is that to invest in policies that fight against hunger and poverty is not related just to social assistance. It's important, of course, and it's a human right, but to invest in effective policies that foster the food and nutritional safety and fights the multidimensional poverty, it's also an intelligent investment. It's a good application of the resources that the countries have and that are available in the international as well. So I'm making this call to action, bringing together financial agents that are dedicated to this agenda and getting these agents to talk within the policy pack of the Alliance. We believe that the Alliance will be able to make relevant contribution to face these problems. So I'd like to end my talk here, and I'd like to thank you all for my attention. Thank you, Thiago. This piece of information you brought in the end is very important, and it shows how the food is at the center of the problem. On the one hand, related to climate changes and diversity, lack of diversity, but it's also a solution. I know Saulo was going to have to leave. We will have questions, a Q&A later on, but Saulo, you specifically, while you're here with us, I would like you to share about the adhesion to the Alliance. You said that you guys are open to the membership, and maybe talk a little bit more about that. And Thiago already talked about this element related to the G20 that could be a good contribution, but G20 isn't the whole world. So how is the G20 dialoguing with the rest of the world in this international arena? Thank you, Paula. And I'd like to apologize beforehand because I will have to leave, but I make myself available for any questions. I answered the question in the chat, and if you guys have any more questions, you will have my contact information in the chat. So if you have any other questions, you can get in touch. But in relation to the membership, to become a member of the alliance, a country or any other institution, they need to present what's called a commitment declaration, which is a document that was negotiated. So there's a model that was negotiated, and we discussed it, and it was approved. So if you look at the documents that are part of the alliance, you will find this example, this model of commitment declaration. It's a very simple document, but the countries need to go through an internal process to present what they can bring to the alliance in terms of offering financing and technical abilities, and also in terms of demands that some countries will present, and the need of the support for the implementation of public policies, the expansion or improvement of these public policies that they already have nowadays. So we already have the recommendation of many countries, basically the G20 countries, all of them should become members. They participated in the negotiations, but we have countries from other regions, and they looked for us and they said they would like to become members. We don't want to talk in numbers yet. We will be announcing them in November. Thank you.
Obrigada, Saulo. Já estava querendo que você desse spoiler.
Thank you, Saulo. I was hoping you would give us a spoiler. Maybe tell us beforehand, before November. But well, anyway, I'd like to thank everyone who was a part of this first the first round, virtual roundtable, and we're going to go to the second part now of the event. Everyone can ask your questions in the chat, and we will have a debate. And now I am going to let Jayati speak, and I met her in Rio not long ago because of an event, but I went specifically to watch a documentary that is called Tax Wars, which is an analogy with Star Wars, for those who don't know. And this documentary brought very interesting data in relation to this global tax system, who actually pays taxes, who doesn't pay, what are the possibilities to kind of get around the system, and that make this global financial architecture even more complex, and make the challenge to fight inequalities within countries and among countries. It makes this challenge almost unbearable. It's almost impossible to overcome if we don't move things around and if we don't understand what's happening in this international tax system. So I saw some examples of great transnationals where they pay absolutely nothing or very small amount of taxes, and the same thing for the super rich. So I think Jayati is bringing a very important point of view for us to elevate this debate, and we know that things need to happen in the Brazil level, and we'll be talking more about that later on, but things need to happen in the international level as well, so we can actually be able to face this challenge that we have ahead of us. So to introduce Jayati, she's a professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she's co-chair of the Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation. Jayati is the author or edited 19 books, and her research interests include globalization, commerce, international finances, job market, macroeconomic policies, inequality, and gender. Thank you for being here with us virtually here in Brazil, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you for inviting me to this. And it was a very interesting discussion to listen to. I have to say, for the rest of us in the world, Brazil is really a great example. Also, in terms of how inclusive your process in the run-up to the G20 meeting has been, and how active C20 has been in so many different areas in terms of the policies. And I really do hope that you're going to continue all of this activity well beyond the G20 meeting itself, because it really shows how much you can do when you get civil society together. I want to focus on the international dimension of the food insecurity that so many countries are facing in two dimensions. So one is absolutely the taxation that Paula just talked about, but the other is actually about the financial regulation aspect. And I want to highlight this because, let's try and remember the last time G20 was really effective in doing something. It was 2009, April, after the global financial crisis. I mean, I'm sorry to say that it was so long ago, but that was really the time when it was effective. And that's largely because this was a crisis that also affected the advanced economies and G7. And so G20, in fact, was galvanized to do something about it. Now we are facing major crises across the developing world, including many of the non-G7 members of G20. But we don't face the same urgency. And I think that is something we need to push. And I'm going to make two strong propositions. I believe that the international financial architecture today is an impediment to achieving this Sustainable Development Goal 1. That is, it is not just something which is not actively helping, it's actively preventing us from meeting the goal of eliminating hunger and reducing poverty. And why is that? It's essentially because it denies governments their rightful share of tax revenues in a way that I'm going to talk about later. But also, it enables private finance to create very destabilizing impacts, which affect the ability of people and governments in the developing world to import food or to purchase food. And this was very evident, especially over the last 4 years. So the COVID-19 pandemic certainly impacted people's livelihoods. In Brazil, you were fortunate that you also gave a lot of social protection at that time. But many countries could not and did not provide social protection to their people. And so many people went hungry during the pandemic. But in fact, the worst hunger came afterwards. It came from before the Ukraine war even started, when there were already noises about the Ukraine war. We had a dramatic increase in global food prices, especially for wheat. Remember, both Russia and Ukraine export wheat, and Russia also exports fertilizers. We saw global prices of wheat in particular double over 8 months. And this, everybody assumed that this is because the war has affected supplies. That is not true. The war did not affect global supplies. In fact, where Russia and Ukraine were not exporting so much, other countries were exporting more. And in fact, global supply did not change at all. So why did global prices go up so much? Because the major agri-businesses in the world, who control about 85% of the global food market, they had basically hiked up their prices using everyone's fears that the war would cause prices to rise. They basically exploited that and massively hiked up prices so that these 4 companies got their highest revenues and highest profits ever in the period around the mid-2021 period. And in addition, we got financial speculation in commodity markets. So it wasn't just the agribusinesses who were raking it in. It was a whole range of financial players who invested in commodity futures, took long positions that forced the future price up, which then impacted on the current price or the spot price. So we saw dramatic increases in food prices, especially wheat, in the global markets. But none of this was based on anything real. It was not real demand and real supply. So obviously it came down again. So by the end of the year, you see that prices are back to where they were before the Ukraine war in the global markets. Unfortunately, for low and middle income countries, our prices did not go down. So the global price came down, but the prices for middle income countries, low income countries continued to rise. So, in the period between September 21 and September 23, September 22 and September 23, that's when the prices fell. the FAO's food price index fell by 11.5%. Okay, so quite a sharp decline in the food price index. Prices in middle-income countries increased by 10.3%. Upper middle-income countries. For lower middle-income country, Brazil is an upper middle-income country, the average food price increased by 10.3%. For lower middle-income countries like India, it increased by 12.4%. For low-income countries, mostly in Africa, but also some in other continents, they increased by 30%. This is a period when the global food price is falling, but the food price in these countries is going up. And this is not because they were having something wrong. It was because there was massive currency depreciation, which made the importing of food much more expensive. And governments were less able to finance any social protection measures that would keep the food prices down inside the countries. So part of this was because many low-income countries especially have a lot of external debt, and they had to service this sovereign debt, and they spent more money on servicing foreign debt than they did on health, education, food security, social protection, everything. But the other part is that they were absolutely unable to raise revenues. Partly there is a capital flight, and partly it is the global tax system that does not allow them to raise revenues from their own rich people or from multinational corporations. And this is actually a major reason why we have so much hunger spreading across the world. It's not just that we won't meet SDG 1, we are reversing. We're getting worse than we were 4 years ago. The direction is in the opposite, very depressing way. And so clearly we need major reforms in both of these. We need much more regulation of the commodities markets and commodity futures markets. We need international strategic grain reserves and national regional grain reserves and stockpiles or buffer stocks. We need much more coordination in terms of influencing and enabling the taxing of excess profits of multinationals that are raking it in bad times, which would actually reduce their incentive to raise the prices and just get excess profits. And we need tax reform. So I think Paula has already mentioned the importance of tax reform. Let me briefly tell you two of the areas that are crying out for reform. One of them, Brazil has already taken up, and I think it's excellent that they have been so active in pushing for a wealth tax. Just 2% of the wealth of the extremely rich, which really they won't notice. This is like a stock market variation for them. It really is not a big deal. But in fact, research by Gabriel Zuckman, which he presented, thanks to Brazil, which he presented to G20, shows that just 2% of the tax on centimillionaires, people who hold more than $100 million, will generate $250 billion per year. Think of what you can do with that money. It's really, and we are talking about, inadequate climate finance, inadequate development finance, all of these things you can generate. Within countries, taxing the ultra rich, or even not necessarily even the centimillionaires, let's say even people who have tens of millionaires. In some of our countries, they are also the super rich. A small tax on the wealth will generate significant revenues, but you have to then know where they're keeping their wealth. So we need asset registers. We need all countries to collect data on who actually owns the wealth, who's the beneficial owner of all this wealth, all this property. Instead of just allowing the rich to put their money into trusts that nobody knows who is the beneficiary, there have to be rules that say the beneficial owners have to be revealed, and then that information should be exchanged among tax authorities so that you can tax the rich wherever they are. We have the exchange of banking information. Colombia has instituted a tax like this, where you can tax the rich wherever they keep their money. But in addition, taxing multinationals is crucial because at the moment they get away with almost no tax. And that's because they shift all their profits to low tax jurisdictions. Instead of that, we already have a minimum global tax of 15%. We should actually have it much higher, 21% at least. But even that 15% must be implemented by all countries. What does that mean? It means that if a company is operating in your country but is paying almost no tax and says all its profits are in some third country, some tax haven, where it doesn't pay tax, then you are entitled to tax that difference. And that's a very important move, which would reduce multinationals doing this. Also, we should treat the multinationals as one company. So it's not Apple India, Apple Brazil, Apple France, Apple Germany. It is Apple. And every country taxes Apple's global profits, its share of Apple's global profits, according to sales and employment. If we do that, once again, there's no incentive to move it around, and it won't help a corporation to just move it around. All we're asking is that a multinational company should be paying the same rate of tax as a domestic company. That's not a big ask, but it would make a huge difference to revenues. Once again, another 250 billion estimated we would get if we actually did such a proposal. There are many national policies. I think Brazil is far ahead of many of the rest of the world in terms of good policies for promoting food security and reducing hunger. But all of them require funding, and all of them require greater public resource mobilization. So I think these two parts of the international architecture are those that those countries in the G20 who can influence for a more progressive agenda should really keep putting as in the first place. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's very important to bring this international perspective. The tax distortions are great in any space, and this funny of the commodities and the financial speculation. Now we're going to move on to a perspective. It's actually an estimate that the World Bank did. And in the case of Brazil, it's a model in relation to social participation, and this is also a reference in relation to the concept of the ultra-processed food. Parents of the new classification that created the term of the ultra-processed food. And it's a very important piece for us to understand what's happening with the global food systems and why do we have the crisis we have now. It's a very important piece in this puzzle. And so the proposal to bring this perspective from the World Bank, it's within the discussion of the tax reform in Brazil. What could it mean if we tax more these types of food, of course, based on evidence, of course, and data with no biases, and do this based on their impact on health. And many people commented in the chat how these foods have actually become cheaper and more accessible with time, and this has a horrible impact in the health of the population and also of the planet. I think the study from the World Bank did this very well to bring this to the center of the discussion. I'm going to make an analogy. I think Thiago mentioned here that we're talking about very complex problems, but we have a few keys within these complex problems which bring simple solutions, or relatively simple solutions, if we are able to overcome the obstacles that are more in the political level than the technical level. So Courtney, you have the floor. Courtney, actually, I'm going to introduce you first. She's a senior health specialist, global health nutrition in Latin America and the Caribbean at the World Bank. She also has a degree in the Georgetown University. She has a master's in research about female leadership in favelas and the use of technologies to improve the actions of the government and public services. Courtney, you have. You're going to be sharing your presentation? Yes. Thank you very much, Paula. Can you hear me? Can everyone see my presentation as well? Yes, we can see your presentation, but you need to put into the presentation mode. Okay, great. Now it's perfect. The interpreter cannot hear. Courtney.
Vou apresentar em inglês.
I will be presenting in English.
E eu vou, como a Paula notou,
And
você autora
like Paula
the potential
mentioned,
of taxes on unhealthy products for improving health outcomes, equity, and financing. Focused, as Paula mentioned, on a study we did on distributional effects of a possible tax on ultra-processed products, which is currently being discussed in Brazil. So to contextualize, we've seen that in many countries, taxes have been a key policy instrument for enabling healthier consumption. And in particular, taxes on alcohol, tobacco, and sugar-sweetened beverages have been widely studied and adopted. Evidence and experience on taxation of unhealthy foods is more limited and is focused largely on taxing the content of single unhealthy nutrients like salt, sugar, and fat in food. And Brazil, as mentioned here, is one of the first countries where a tax on ultra-processed products specifically has been discussed in the ongoing tax reform. And this approach could offer several advantages in terms of reducing consumption of potentially harmful industrial ingredients and additives, but also by using a more holistic category that's applicable across a broader range of unhealthy products. And this can help avoid unhealthy product substitutions, as we've seen in some other taxation scenarios. So why is this important? Dietary risk is a key contributor to non-communicable diseases, and these are responsible for over 70% of deaths worldwide. And there's a growing body of evidence linking the consumption of ultra-processed products in particular with these diseases. So obesity, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, cancer, premature mortality. And the consumption and availability of ultra-processed products is also growing rapidly, particularly in low-income and middle-income countries like Brazil. And as the price of these products is also getting cheaper in relation to unprocessed whole foods, in many settings, this is a major concern for health and for equity. And health taxes can play a key role in helping to revert this trend. So a little bit about the study that we conducted. We simulated a 20% tax on processed and ultra-processed products in Brazil and analyzed distributional effects in terms of 3 dimensions: product expenditure, changes in years of life lost, and related medical expenditures. And as I'll explain, we found the tax would have progressive effects in all 3 of these dimensions. So here we see consumption profiles in Brazil by consumption decile, that is splitting the population into 10 groups from the poorest to the richest 10%. And this graph shows the proportion of food types that each decile consumes using the NOVA classification system that Paula mentioned, which is the basis for most of the global literature on ultra-processed foods. And interestingly, was also born in Brazil at the University of São Paulo in the late 2000s. So this classification divides foods into 4 categories: unprocessed and minimally processed foods, culinary ingredients, processed and ultra-processed, which are essentially products made almost exclusively with industrial ingredients. And interestingly, you can see here that the lowest or poorest deciles tend to consume less ultra-processed products in Brazil as a proportion of their diet, represented by the purple blocks. And in all deciles, unprocessed food still represent more than 50% of consumption, with the exception of the highest or richest decile. So we also note that the consumption of ultra-processed products still doesn't represent more than 30% of food consumption across all the deciles. And this differentiates Brazil from some high-income countries like the United States, for example, where ultra-processed product consumption already represents over 60% of energy consumption. But other studies show that this is changing. And Brazil, like other middle and low-income countries, we see the consumption of ultra-processed products has been rapidly increasing, and particularly among the poor. So we have a limited window to create and reinforce public policies that can help avoid this transition and the negative effects that it could have on the health of the population. So I'll quickly show the results of our study in terms of the 3 dimensions of analysis. In terms of price elasticity of demand, that is the changes in demand for products in relation to changes in their price, we see that elasticity is high, so that in all deciles, we would see benefits from reducing consumption of taxed ultra-processed products. The poorest groups, being more sensitive to price changes, would have higher proportional reductions in their consumption, and this can enable substitution for healthier products. And we also observed that across all deciles, particularly among the poorest, that sensitivity to price changes is even higher for unprocessed foods. So policies that have been mentioned here today also that facilitate access to these foods could also have a positive and progressive impact. So in terms of years of life lost, similarly, we observed that each decile would gain from increasing life years from reduced consumption of ultra-processed products, which we quantified in terms of income. And again, the lowest deciles have significantly higher income gains. We see that the curve here is very steep. Lastly, in terms of reduced medical expenditures due to the reduction in health problems that could result from reduced consumption of ultra-processed products, we see that expenditures would be reduced proportionally more for the poorest deciles. So in summary, to highlight that tax reform, as we've seen in Brazil, is not just a fiscal policy, it is also a health policy. And our findings suggest that the taxation of ultra-processed products in Brazil would be progressive. That is, people in poorer deciles experience greater gains in terms of healthier consumption, years of life, and reduced medical expenditures. And this is consistent with global evidence on the multiple potential benefits of health taxes. Also, the consumption of ultra-processed products in Brazil and elsewhere is increasing. So we do have a limited window to discourage consumption of these products and to promote access to healthy foods. And taxing unhealthy products is one tool that could be part of a broader policy toolkit to help achieve this. And to conclude, I also wanted to highlight the important role that civil society has played here in Brazil for both advocating for and informing Brazil's tax reform. We've been part of a working group and an active policy discussions that have helped facilitate exchanges between the ministries of health, finance, other ministries, academia, and civil society in particular with ACT. And we hope that other countries can learn from this experience, and the World Bank is happy to continue contributing to this important dialogue. Thanks so much again.
Thank you, Courtney. It's very impactful when we can visualize what would be the effect of the political options that we have the opportunity to make. I will be continuing the presentation session. Now I'm going to let Natalie begin to have the floor. Thank you for your presence here, Natalie. She's been present in the global stage in very important discussions. She's an economist with a doctorate in social policies from the University of Brasilia, and she's a member of Inesc, which is an NGO. She acted as an assistant to the president in the Ministry of Health, and she was a researcher in the Econômica Aplicada Research Institute, IPEA, in the areas of poverty, hunger, food safety, and social actions in the companies. Natalie, you have the floor, so tell us about the perspective we have in the global scenario. It's a pleasure to be here with this very selective group of people. I feel very honored. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to complement a bit what Jayari mentioned, and I'm from Inesc, but I'm talking here as a member of the Alliance for Fiscal Fairness, acting in the UN for the approval of the international taxation in the UN. So we do have the resources to face these hunger, poverty problems. We have access to these resources without having to, like Jayari and Henrique mentioned, this drama in relation to the debt, especially the ones in the global south. It's terrible. So Jayati mentioned this. The resources are there, but they need to be mobilized. And Jayati mentioned a little bit about how this happens and how the resources are taken from the government by tax evasion, by the non-paying of taxes, and fiscal incentive that the country is of trying to attract capital in this crazy race. So my idea here to complement a little bit of what Jayati mentioned related to the mechanisms happen. I wanted to give you some numbers. Of course, they are related, they are examples, but it's to show that they exist, like Courtney mentioned here, to show how it can make a big difference to tax or not to tax. So in just the tax evasion in our NGO world, we have a a global network that studies taxation, and it shows that every year the countries in the world lose almost $500 billion uh, in tax evasion, both from companies and very rich people. So it's 480 billion per year that could be taken by the countries, but they're not, because these companies and these very rich people create legal mechanisms to avoid this. I don't know if Henrique, you mentioned, of course, most of these resources that are evaded are in the north because that's where the economical rich wealth is. In the developing countries, this evasion is equal to half the health budget of these countries. So it's a lot. Another way of draining resources that Jayati mentioned is that the super rich that don't pay taxes, and many times illegally, like here in Brazil, the super rich, they get their they invest their money and they get their wealth from dividends, and they don't pay any taxes on that. And if we tax 3% the billionaires, you can mobilize almost $500 billion per year. So if these people pay, like Jayati mentioned, if they pay just a little bit, 2%, which is the equivalent of speculation from one day to the next, we could be able to mobilize almost $500 billion. We have another study that shows that if we applied in all of the countries in the world, the Spanish proposal to tax 0.5% most rich in all the countries in a progressive manner, so increasing from 0.5%, we would be able to mobilize 2.1 trillion per year. So that's not that's a lot. So these are examples to show you that the resources are there, they just need to be mobilized. And the last draining mechanism are the tax incentive, fiscal incentive. Here in Brazil, it's equivalent to 4% of the GDP. In Brazil, 4% of the GDP are 4 or 3 bolsas famílias per year. And most of these incentives, I'm not saying we shouldn't incentivize anything, but until now, we don't have any evaluation that shows that these incentives that for the certain sectors benefit society or the economy. Another dramatic example that connects hunger and nutrition and health with climate change is that the subsidies to the fossil fuels are around 1.3 trillion. And most of these subsidies are from incentives. So to eliminate these incentives to the fossil fuels could reduce the pressure in global warming and make available resources for climate and to fight hunger, poverty, and malnutrition, because agriculture is the cause for the global warming, but it can also, Fernanda Machiaveli knows this better than me, it can also become a solution for climate change. So all of this is to show a little bit about what Jayati mentioned. We do have the resources to mobilize. And for this, we need to support the UN initiative for the framework in their framework, because to hold back these companies and not allow them to do what they do, we need to have global rules, global laws. The global South and the African Union said that's enough, because what you guys are talking about in OECD, it's not meeting our needs. Some of the countries from the global south said these rules are not good enough for us, and we're tired of you guys there deciding what's good for you and not including us. So we're gonna move the debate to the United Nations, and it's there now, and we're in the approval phase to install the convention in a more democratic space, multilateral space, and it's been becoming very interesting from the geopolitical point of view, because the South is tired of the North arrogance and is moving the debate to a more plural space, because it is, even though the UN has its problems, but it's a better space. And related to the international cooperation, we hope that it can establish to review the fiscal incentives that hold back the flow of money that do this legally, and to fight tax havens for countries and for the super rich. So the convention could establish the rules that would allow us to hold back this drainage in the resources that empty the public safes, and like Henrique mentioned as well, the debts that are crazy values that are imposed in the global south. So the message for this from the C20 and the social G20 to the leaders is to support this framework in the UN, because it's important to promote fairness and equity, peace, to fight hunger, malnutrition, and poverty as well. Thank you, Paula. Thank you. It's very important to have the perspective to bring solution linked to the global level, because as we've noticed here, no country will be able to do everything by itself, especially in the dealing with the international financial market. Now I'm going to let Fabrício have the floor from WWF, and he's been organizing with us this event. And WWF is also following up closely the treaty on plastic pollution. We've been following up on that. It's a big challenge. Fabrício de Campos is leader of the Sustainable Finance and Markets team in WWF Brazil. And they fight deforestation and support biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, using the financial sector to do that. He has a degree in agronomic engineering, and he's part of the global leadership team in WWF. So, Fabrício, tell us what you have to say about this financial system that's so problematic. What is its role in the collective challenges we have as humanity? Paula, I would like to say first that I'm privileged to be a part of this panel. It's a very rich discussion. And I'd like to tell you, we need to promote more panels and events like this one. You can count on us. WWF, for those who don't know our organization, it's the Nature World Fund. And we want to build a world where people and nature can live in harmony. And listening to you all today in the panel, which was amazing, talking about external debt, poverty, the debt of the nations, production, access to food, and the finance is linked to all of these aspects. But I would like to invite you all to focus on a topic that we've been working on a lot in the past few years, which is in the production of food and financing of this production. And I would like to reflect a bit about how we can use this will from the financial system to send resources to green investments within the topic of the food safety and the distribution of healthy foods as well. Can I go on to the screen? Yes, it's a beautiful picture from Anavilhanas. I think that's the place. I believe so. This picture is not mine, but I do believe. Well, like what was mentioned here, most of the food that gets to the Brazilian table, it's produced by family farmers who are in different parts of Brazil. And we mentioned here that 77% of the rural properties in Brazil, they are of family farmers. This does not mean that this number is enough. It doesn't mean we don't have a land distribution problem in Brazil, but most of the rural properties belong to family farmers. And this does not mean that they have the total of land in Brazil. But you can see that it's a huge population that produces our food. And I think the best policy, the greatest policy for agriculture in Brazil happens through the rural credit called Safra Plan. And this is a federal credit line that subsidies agriculture and is distributed through the national financial system through different financial institutions. In the Safra Plan of 2023-2024, we allocated 13.6 billion, and this is not the total, this is the number to equalize the interest. So this is to subsidy a cheaper credit for the agricultural production. So 13.6 billion reais have been allocated, and out of these, 8.5 billion designated to subsidize the national plan for family farming in the PRONAF plan of the program of the country. And I think it's the most important financial program for small farmers. It's a very important program, and it has a huge impact in the economic, in the rural economy in many places in Brazil. But only 15% of the family farmers in Brazil have access to this credit, even though we have this huge amount of money for subsidy to make this credit line more valuable and customized for this public. We're talking here about a credit line that has a 2% interest per year. So this is the type of credit that even the most vulnerable people can access and pay. We only get to 15% of the family farmers in the country. There's also a huge concentration of these contracts in the south and southeast of the country. So for example, 29% of the producers in the south are able to access these credit lines from PRONAF, while in the north, only 9% of them are able to do it. And this is a phenomenon linked to the lack of access for these people. They can't access the financial system in the north. And I'd like to highlight the Amazonic population that live in the remote areas, and they need to become a focus of these public policies for food production, especially through. So besides these population having less access to the resources, they're the people who are more vulnerable and exposed to climate change and to the extreme weather events as well, which can mean they can lose their crops, and they are not only food producers, but they are also within food vulnerability as well, the situation as well. I think there's still a lot of space, even though this program is very successful in the financing of family farming, but we do have a lot of room for improvement in this program. With the climate policy initiative, we've been talking a lot to the federal government to improve these credit lines for the family farmers and also for more sustainable agriculture in the country. But we also need the efforts of the financial institutions that distribute this credit to get to where they're most needed. So a big bank, maybe they are not interested or they don't have enough infrastructure to access the communities that produce açaí, for example, in Alto Tapajós. These banks are not present there, and this population cannot access these financial services. Even the credit cooperatives that are able to spread out more and they are able to offer financial services more in a spread out manner, more broadly, they still aren't able to get to these spaces yet. So we need to work together, the government and private initiative, so we can get these resources to where they're most needed. And here we have an opportunity to use these green financial instruments to help to redirect this flow of capital to where it's most needed, but also to broaden this capital flow. And we won't be able to get to 100% to the family farmers if we only use the public money. We really need to build partnerships with the private sector and international financial system. And we do have some paths to follow to do that, but I think partnership is the word here. We can't also depend only on public policies because we know that the political arena changes and public policies can be undone with one signature at any moment. So to create this, we need to create a network where it can distribute credit to where it's needed. And that does not depend only on public policy, that is fundamental. In the context leaded by the Ministry of Treasury, the government is creating the sustainable taxonomy of Brazil. And this is a group of criteria for different sectors that decide and create rules to what is a green investment in Brazil. This has been in Europe. We do have the taxonomy of Europe and other Latin American countries like Mexico and Colombia. And now we're in the process of building our own. WWF has been following up closely this work, and we've been talking with the ministries and other organizations from civil society and social movements as well. So we can build this taxonomy in the best way possible for it to be really green, but not really green. So, but also so that it can bring social fairness and inclusion here in Brazil. Because like Chico Mendes mentioned once, and environmentalism without social inclusion is just gardening. So we need to bring this aspect of food safety and food production within this green. And here I have a call to action for the financial institutions, be they national or international. We want them to look at their financial flow, and the first one is basic. We don't even need the green label, but every financial institution should have within their risk evaluation, they need to guarantee that their investment portfolio, the current ones and future ones, they should not harm or disrupt the food systems, especially the local and regional ones. And these financial flows and those responsible for them that don't analyze this can cause big disruption in the production of food, especially regionally and locally, be it through contamination or the increase of conflict for access to land and the concentration of land as well. We also need an effort from the financial system, like I mentioned before, to get where it hasn't gotten to before. So microcredit programs should be incentivized so this credit can get to the most vulnerable populations. And here, already linking this to the main topic here in the panel. Here,
Here,
financial incentives can make a big difference. The different taxation system for the microcredit programs, the private ones, not public ones, the private microcredit programs, they can reduce the cost of operation of these lines and also incentives. I don't want to take too much time, but reduce the risk from for these microcredit lines. We could attract more private capital to them and also the investors themselves. Nowadays, we have an incentive for investments in the agribusiness. We could also do this for the family farmers. And above all, within the context of climate crisis, it's very important for us to establish strong credit lines to finance technologies and processes that are appropriate to the climate change adaptation of these populations. And it needs to be implemented on a large scale. So, Paula, I have finished my presentation and you have.
Obrigada, Fabrício. Acho que a gente tem muitos elementos
Thank you
aqui
very
para
much,
um
Fabrício.
bom
I think we have
debate, né?
many elements here for
anotei
very
aqui
good
algumas
debate.
coisas,
I
vou
took
trazer um pouco
some
também
notes.
da perspectiva, tentando reunir alguns desses
I'm going to
elementos
bring a little bit
também,
of
um pouco a perspectiva
perspective
que a gente
here,
tem
trying to bring together these elements
trabalhado
and a
aqui,
little bit of the
né,
perspective we've been
não só a
working
nível
on
nacional, mas
here,
também a
not in the
nível
national
global, né?
level, but in the global level
Queria
as
trazer
well.
alguns exemplos também
I
do
would
que
like to bring
acontece no
some
Brasil, né,
examples
com
of
relação a
what
essas
happens in
distorções
Brazil in
tributárias e
relation
para onde
to
está indo o
these
dinheiro.
tax
Pede
distortions and
até
where
para
the money is
a Marília
going
aí da equipe
to, and
compartilhar aí
I'd like to ask
link aí onde a
Marília
gente
to
está
share the
articulando aí
link
o conjunto
where
de
we're
evidências que a gente
bringing
tem
together the evidence we have
trazido ao longo dos últimos anos para entender, né,
throughout the
pouco assim, o que
past
está
years
acontecendo com o
to
preço dos
understand a little bit
alimentos, né?
about
Acho
what's
que foram
happening with
várias
the price of
observações que foram
food.
feitas, essa
I think
questão do preço
this
dos
has been
alimentos, ela não está
mentioned in the
descolada,
issue. This issue
desse
is
sistema
not
agroalimentar com fortes
disconnected
distorções que vão do campo da
disconnected from the
produção
system that
até o
start in the
consumo, por
production
exemplo,
down
de
to
lá
the
do alimento
consumption,
chegar na casa, na mesa, no prato das
to the
pessoas, né?
point where the food is
E no
on
caso do
people's
Brasil específico,
plate.
a gente
And in
tem
the case of
trabalhado em
Brazil
cooperação
specifically,
com
we
outras
have been
organizações
working
trabalhando em
together with
outras
other
áreas, né? O nosso foco
organizations
aqui
and
foi
other
na área da
areas. Our
saúde,
focus
mas sem perder
is
de vista os
mainly in the
elementos da
health
sustentabilidade e
area,
da
but we
justiça
also like to
social,
keep in
né? Então, a
mind
gente faz parte do
sustainability and
coletivo
social
Mais Amplo,
justice
que é um
as
coletivo que
well. So
vem
we're part of
promovendo
a
discussões
broader
sobre uma reforma que
collective
seja
that has been promoting
transversal,
discussion
solidária,
of
saudável e
SSS
sustentável. E a gente nem começou
reform,
ainda, né, a
solidarity,
discutir a questão
healthy,
distributiva na reforma, né? A gente ainda
and
está
social,
na
and
primeira fase dela,
we
quer dizer,
are only in the
tem
first
muita coisa ainda
phase
para
and
acontecer
of
nessa
this
categoria.
reform, so there's a
Mas
lot to
dentro
happen.
do que já aconteceu até agora, eu queria
But
pegar
within
aqui
what
assim
happened up
alguns
until
casos assim
now,
que
I'd
são
like
bem
to bring
escandalosos
some
a nível de
cases
Brasil, e acho
that
importante a gente
are
explicitar
very
eles. É até um estudo que a gente
big.
fez também,
And one of them is actually a study
que
that
traz assim um
WWF
pouco
is a
dos
part of
números da soja, né? O
that
tamanho
brings
dos subsídios, né?
the
Você trouxe, acho que
the
foi
numbers of
importante trazer
soy,
isso
the
assim da importância
number
do
or the
Pronaf,
size of the
mesmo
subsidies.
sendo
And you talk
importante,
about the
porque
importance of
ele não chega
Pronaf,
às
even though
resultados
it's
que ele deveria
very
chegar.
important, but it doesn't get
Isso
to where
sem
it should.
entrarmos em toda uma
And
discussão de que
this, we
muitas
don't
vezes o
even
dinheiro
have,
do
didn't even
Pronaf
have
está
a
indo
whole
para
discussion
sistemas
that the money
integrados de
from Pronaf is
produção,
going
embora seja
to
agricultura
integrated
familiar, mas
systems of
está indo para
production, even though it's
sistemas de
family
produção,
farming,
muitas
but
vezes
it's
até
going
da
to
própria
these
soja,
integrated
né?
systems,
A
even
gente nem entrou nesse
a lot of the
exemplo
time
ainda.
it's for
Mas
soy,
antes
actually.
desse,
We
antes
didn't even
ainda desse
mention that.
problema, tem
But
um outro
before this
problema de
problem, we
fundo,
have
que
another
se a gente
problem in the
compara
background,
quanto que vai para a
which
agricultura
is if we
familiar e quanto que
compare
vai
how
para
much is going to the
saco
family
para
farming
exportação de
and how
commodities no
much is
Brasil,
going
tem
for this
um abismo
export
gigantesco,
of
né? A gente vai
commodities,
falar
there's a
aqui
huge gap there.
desses dados que a gente levantou de
And with the
2019,
data that we got
a
from
gente está falando de
2019, we're
57 bilhões de
talking about
reais, né? Assim, no
57
único
billion
ano, e eu acho que
reais
se a gente
in 1 year.
esses dados, eles vão
If
ser
we
ainda
update
maiores, né? Então,
these
assim, isso é
numbers,
uma
I think they're going to
questão
be even
de
bigger.
fundo que ela acaba sendo muito
So
determinante
this is a background issue,
lá na
but
frente. E
this
isso, obviamente,
determines
impacta
a
diretamente no
lot the
preço dos
future and
ultraprocessados
has
lá na
a
frente.
direct
A gente está
impact in the
falando,
price
né,
of ultra
dos grandes
processed
commodities
foods.
aí também
In the
produzidos no
future, we're
Brasil, de
talking about the
soja,
great
milho,
commodities that
açúcar,
are produced
são moedas
soy,
fortemente
corn, sugar.
subsidiadas, tem uma
they have a lot of subsidy, they have a problematic productive chain, the usage of pesticides, for example, and many other issues that have an impact on health. And when we talk about the defense, which seems a small part of the tax system, in taxing things that are bad for your health or environment, but I just got a global report, the health taxes, that's an initiative that happened in 2019 and was renovated now. And they have very impactful numbers there. Because if we just think about this piece there, just about consumption, and trying to mitigate a bit the impact of the consumption and production of these products on health through the increase of the final price using the tax to do that. We have some data here. We're talking here about ultra-processed food, alcohol, tobacco. Alcohol and tobacco is more consolidated. We know that these are products that need to have a higher tax, but I'd like to bring numbers that the report brought. And this was a global task force, and they say that these taxes on health, they're good for health, good for the public, and is a political and very good solution in a scenario of poly crisis, which is a scenario that we're living. We have recession, inflation, geopolitical conflicts in different parts of the world. But we have been progressing very little in this area, and the whole 2030 agenda, this type of taxes, but there's a solution for you to be able to finance some things. But then if you can get a tax that increase the 50% the price of tobacco or sugar drinks, you would save 50 million lives. These are fresh numbers. We are sharing the link here. And we would be able to get 2.3 trillion in 5 years and 1.2 trillion in medium and low income countries. I just wanted to bring this number so we know that bringing together, even beyond the taxing of the super rich and the companies, we also have this option, which is very important internationally and nationally. And besides the soy subsidy, an example is the situation of Brazil. Here I'll be linking what Fernanda mentioned earlier, and I think Thiago talked a little bit about this, the products of the social biodiversity in Brazil and the potential that we have here in Brazil. Fabrício mentioned this, the productive potential we have in Brazil to produce quality food that are nutritious and that actually feed people and actually are good for the environment. This is a huge possibility for Brazil. It has never been taken into consideration consistently before. But another example, which I think is important to mention, we're talking about the COP 30 in the Amazon region, the Manaus Zona Franca, they subsidy Ambev and Coca-Cola, and we're talking about billions of reais per year, and it's scandalous what happens there. I actually asked for them to share the link as well. We've known this for many years, the scenario of subsidies in the production of soda. I think this is scandalous. I mean, creating subsidies for soda. Everybody knows this is harmful, the product harmful to the health. So we have this type of scenario we need to expose constantly so we can find a solution for it. And now Jayani here can hear us. I don't know what the global scenario is, and we've been reading frequently the reports with annual reports from Coca-Cola, for example, and these good results in Latin America, they are due to the situation here in Brazil in relation to the Manaus region, and it involves other great companies since Brazil is the greatest producer of beer in the world. And not only beer, but they became the greatest global corporation that produces alcohol drinks that has Brazilians as leaders. And they're getting subsidies from the Manaus region as well. And this is a thing that is untouchable almost, with many political actors involved. But I think nothing is impossible So I think we can find a solution for this. And
Desculpa aí pela Luísa, obrigada aí pela
I'm
correção.
sorry,
Você
Luisa,
tinha
thank you for
misturado
the
aí Manaus com
correction.
Belém,
I
mas eu
mixed up
pensei em
Manaus and
região
Belém
ali por
cities, but
Niterói, né?
I thought of the region as a whole. COP30.
Ou seja, né, eu acho que assim, a gente tem esse exemplo, eu acho que o
So
fato da CT, no
I
caso
think
do
we have this example, the origin of the city in the control of tobacco. We heard many times that to regulate the industries of tobacco, which were very powerful, and they still are, people thought that this would be impossible to do. And I think we advanced a lot on this. So I think it's possible to advance in other areas as well within the ultra processed food would be nowadays equivalent to what tobacco was before. And that's my opinion. And I wanted to bring a last topic about the health budget for the countries, the data, the information that Thiago brought that affected a lot. When we get taxes from products that are dangerous to health, you can increase the health budget by a lot. And Brazil, even though we do have a universal health system, the SUS system, which needs to be advocated for strongly, it is an underfinanced system. So imagine what we could do if it had adequate financing for a health system, which was what was able to deal with the political crisis that we had during the pandemic. If we didn't have SUS, we would be way worse off because we had attacks not just from the virus, but how the country responded, the government responded, and I think SUS helped us deal with this. But well, time went by much more quickly than we hoped for, and we kind of knew this, I think, beforehand, but we had some questions in the chat that I would like to share. So we can get to the closing remarks, considering what everyone heard, because we won't be able to have a Q&A and then come back because we don't have enough time, but I'll bring 3 questions that came up in the chat. And you guys can make any comments you would like. The question with climate change, the crops are suffering a lot of losses. And can this worsen the food safety in Brazil? Another question. Many questions about the management of the debt and interest paid world. So they made many comments related to this, related to the debt that was mentioned by a lot of people who are suffering from hunger, and also the related to the interest paid over the debts. And I think this is a more general theme, and we have an example from the report that the UK allows the vulnerable countries to draft debts, and then they give assistance or external help. I think this is one of the contradictions that we need to face as well. On one hand, you take from them, and then on the other hand, you want to be charitable. And about the SDG 18 as well, we had a question about that that's being discussed. If someone wants to comment about this, I think it's important to bring this debate to the SDGs. And we also have disabled people. And if any of you want to comment, answer any of these questions or make any comments, we can start in the order we had the talks. Start with Henrique, maybe. Very quickly, once again, I'd like to thank you, Paula, CT, WWF, all of the organizations, da Cidadania, all of those who are working with C20 in the promotion of this dialogue. I'm not going to answer specific questions. I think Thiago, in his talk, highlighted very well that we are talking about complex problems and there's no one solution or an isolated solution that will be able to deal with all of the problems that we talked about here, because we talked about international taxation and national taxation as well. We talked about the weight of the debt in relation to the countries. We talked about inequalities in the global geopolitics. We talked about how the corporations themselves, the private sector, and Jari highlighted this, how they manipulate political scenarios using war and fear to get higher revenues. There's no evidence that the invasion of Ukraine was a determining factor for the increase in prices. We had other factors, including speculation. So we're talking about many things that are happening at the same time. And so we don't have only one solution, but I would like to mention SDG 18, which is a volunteer SDG that was proposed by Brazil for racial equality. And Brazil has been doing this campaign so that other countries can adhere to the 2030 agenda as a whole. And I think it's very difficult for them to incorporate the new SDG, but we have many countries that propose volunteer SDGs and they try to get the adhesion of other international actors as well. Now going back to the Brazilian reality, it does not matter if we have the tax reform or if we talk about microfinancing for the producers and we improve the access to resources for the family farmers, agroecology. Doesn't matter if we do all of that if we do not address the systemic racism in our societies and the gender inequalities as well that are very profound. And remember, I'd like to remind that it's the women, girls, and indigenous and Black populations, they're the ones that suffer the most with food insecurity. So if we don't deal with this, the other reforms are not enough. So we need to do everything together. And we need to bring to the center these populations to do this, because these are the populations that suffer the most in relation to food insecurity, hunger, and poverty, not only here in Brazil, but the world as a whole. And this impacts many years of development, malnutrition, especially in the early childhood, malnutrition for these peoples and these populations that are racialized and where you have gender profile as well, they have great loss in the development. I'm not going to be talking about economic growth because in the C20 we have a movement of going beyond GDP because they hide other dimensions of development and the needs of the country. I'm talking about development in education, health, prosperity, well-being. So the impact is for many generations. It's an intergenerational impact of malnutrition and poverty. And we can see that the racial inequalities, they demand more than one generation to be overcome. So an investment in the structural change done now will probably only impact future generations. Just like the white privilege also is present in more than one generation, the other way around also happens like that throughout generations. So I'd like to thank everyone who was present here in the debate today. I'd like to say that we're making ourselves available. Fabrício, Paula already invited us for the debate, and I'd like to say that ABONG and C20, we want to be present in the future debates as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Henrique e Thiago.
Oi, gente. Não, eu gostaria
Hi, everyone.
começar pelo ponto
I would
que
just
o
like to
Henrique
start
retomou, né?
by
Os
the
problemas são
final point Henrique
complexos,
made.
mas não é porque eles são complexos
The
que a gente
problems
também
are
não consegue
complex,
elaborar soluções
but
complexas, né?
we can
E a
also
estratégia
elaborate complex
multidimensional que o
solutions for
Brasil
them, and the
adotou no programa Fome Zero
multidimensional
no começo do
strategy
século,
that was
ela é um
created with
exemplo
the
disso.
Fome Zero
Você
program
consegue
in the
articular
beginning of the
diversas
century is an
políticas
example of this.
públicas
So we can
e
articulate and
calibrá-las
move
até para o
different
nível
public
dos
policies and
territórios, né?
adapt them to
Naquele
the
índice
level
artificial
of the
está chegando aí para
territories,
isso,
and
para
AI is
facilitar,
here for this,
e
to
potencializar a capacidade
facilitate and
de a gente
to increase the
identificar e
potential in our
as
ability
melhores
to
formas de
find and
chegar
access the
às
best
pessoas que mais
ways to
precisam,
get to
equilibrar
the
tudo
people who
isso,
really
né?
need it
Mas o que
and
a
to
gente
calibrate
precisa,
all of
acima de
this. But
tudo, é
what
a
we need
vontade
above
política.
all
E essa
is
vontade
political
política,
will.
ela também varia de
And
acordo com os
political
contextos
will also
e
varies
os lugares.
according to the
Normalmente
context
é uma
and
luta
the
ladeira
places,
acima, né?
and
Não é
it's
por
a
causa
hard
disso que a
fight.
gente não vai
But even though it's
tender
a
a
hard
certeza,
fight,
né?
we are going to
Com
fight the
relação à
fight.
questão da dívida
In
e dos
relation
empréstimos,
to the debt
uma coisa
and
que a
loans,
gente, enquanto governo, nós temos
something
tentado
that as a
dialogar com os
government we've been
países
trying to be
a
talking
proposta de
to
troca
other
de
countries, it's
políticas de
the exchange of
enfrentamento
debt for
à fome
policies
e à
in the
pobreza,
fight
né?
against
Então
hunger
isso
and
não é uma
poverty.
coisa simples, mas é uma coisa
This is not
possível.
something simple
Alguns
to do, but
países
it's
fazem
possible.
isso, têm
Some countries
experiência
do
nisso.
this.
Alemanha, Austrália,
Germany,
Espanha, a
Australia,
Rússia fez um
Spain,
programa desse com
Russia
Moçambique
had a
na área
program like this
de
in
segurança alimentar.
Mozambique
Então,
in the
são experiências que
food
existem.
safety
Agora, aumentar a
sector.
quantidade
So we
dessas
have
experiências
experiences. Now, to increase the amount of
é
these
difícil, né?
experiences, that's the hard thing.
O problema mais importante,
The
como
most
nós
important
temos discutido
problem,
aqui,
as
é que a
we
questão
have
do
been discussing
endividamento dos
here,
países
is
periféricos,
the
ela é uma questão
debt
estrutural,
issue for
né?
the vulnerable countries is
Então,
a
um
structural
ponto que
issue.
nos alertam também nesse
So
debate
a
é
point that
que
was brought in this debate as well
é importante
that
enfrentarmos esse
warns us that
problema
it's
da
important
dívida
for
estrutural de
us to
forma
face this
estrutural também.
structural debt
As ações
in a
pontuais
structural
podem dar
manner as
algum
well.
alívio, mas no ano que vem, muito
Specific
provavelmente, esses
actions
países vão
can
ter que
help,
pegar um novo
but
empréstimo.
in the future, these countries will
E se
probably
esse
need
alívio
to get
nesse
another
ano não for
loan.
feito de
And
maneira
if
bem
what's
feita,
done
isso pode significar
this
que no ano que
year,
vem o empréstimo
this
que esse
specific
país vai ser
action,
obrigado a
if it's
pegar
not done
vai
well,
ser
that means that
oferecido
the
a ele com
next
condições
loan
piores
is
daquele
going
que
to be
pegou em
offered with
primeiro lugar,
worse
né?
conditions than the
Então essa é
first
uma
loan
discussão
they
que precisa
got.
ser
So
feita com
this is a discussion
muita
that needs to
cautela,
be done very carefully,
responsabilidade
with
e
a
mirando
lot of
sempre no objetivo
responsibility as
final, que é
well,
criar
and
espaços
always
para
with the
os
final
próprios
goal of
países fazerem
creating
políticas públicas,
fiscal
né?
space for the countries to
Não é
create public
uma discussão
policies.
fácil, mas é uma
Not
discussão
an easy
que
discussion,
precisa
but
ser feita.
it's a discussion that needs
E a
to be
discussão sobre
had.
tributação
And
internacional,
the
que nós
discussion
conseguimos também
on
no ano de 2020
international
dar uma
taxation
contribuição,
that
movemos o
we were
debate
able to contribute within the
passo
G20, and we were
adiante,
able to
né?
take a step forward.
Quero lembrar que esse passo,
And I'd like
nesse
to
nosso
remind you all
contexto
that this
geopolítico e
step in our
geoeconômico
geopolitical and
de intensa
economical
disputa
context
internacional, não é qualquer passo, né? É um passo num
was
cenário
not easy to take.
internacional muito
We have
gigante,
a very difficult international
ele
scenario.
contribui para esses esforços
So
de
this step
tributação
contributes to these
super
efforts
ricos, para não ser que
of
entre
the
aqui o
taxation of the
nome
super
técnico, né,
riches,
da coisa. E que
super rich.
esses
And
recursos,
these
é
resources,
muito importante que eles estejam
it's very important for them
disponíveis, né?
to be
E a cooperação
available.
internacional para fazê-los disponíveis
And the
é fundamental.
international cooperation
Não é
to
um
make
problema
them
que a gente vai
available is
conseguir resolver
fundamental.
um
So it's
país
not a problem that
só,
we'll be able to
ou
solve
talvez um
with
conjunto de países consiga avançar
one
alguma coisa,
country, maybe a group of
mas se a
countries
gente
able to do
construir um
something more
ambiente
about it, but to be able to
internacional
build an
para
international
acordos de
environment for
tributação, é, é tão importante
taxation
quanto o
treaties and agreements,
desenvolvimento das
it's as important as
possibilidades
the
técnicas
development of the
de alcançar esses
technical
recursos e
possibilities
fazer
to
essa
achieve to
distribuição
get to
justa
these
deles,
resources
né?
and to have a
Então
fair
isso tudo para
distribution
nos
of them.
colocarmos cientes
So this
das
is to make
dificuldades
us aware of the
políticas, diplomáticas que
difficulties, the
temos que
political and
avançar
diplomatic
que temos
difficulties
que
that we
enfrentar
have
nesse
to
campo,
face
mas que temos que enfrentar,
in
né?
this field, but
Então é
it's
isso. E a
difficult, but we
gente
need to
fica
face
à
them.
disposição aqui para
And that's
novos
it. So
debates também,
we
viu?
make
Obrigado, gente,
ourselves
pelo convite.
available for new debates as well. Thank
Obrigada,
you for the
Thiago. Vou
invitation.
começar a apertar
Thank
aí
you,
os passos,
Thiago.
uma mensagem
I'm gonna
final, que
ask everyone else to
muito
go a bit
obrigado.
quicker, but thank you.
Agora, Jayati,
Now,
uma
Jayati,
consideração final.
You know,
would you
I
like to make
think,
any
yeah,
final
very
remarks?
quickly. I know everything has already been said, so I don't want to repeat anything. I just want to add something on the drinks companies, the soft drinks companies, Coca-Cola, etc. were mentioned. It's not just that they're bad for health, they are water guzzlers. And they actually destroy the environment in the areas where they put up the bottling plants. And so that's the reason why it's our countries that now have all the bottling plants. And we are being very proud of exporting this, but it's actually a disaster for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Courtney?
Courtney.
Não, também não tenho muito para agregar. Acho que
I don't have a lot to add as well. I think this debate was very interesting. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity of being here. It was very clear that the food systems are moving towards an end that's harmful to health and the environment. And like Thiago mentioned, we need multidimensional strategies to deal with these problems, but they need to be pragmatic as well. And I think Brazil has a lot to offer to the world religion, but also we need to create new mechanisms of international cooperation. So I would like to thank you for the opportunity of being here in this important discussion. Thank you very much, Courtney, for your partnership. Natalie? I'd like to make 3 quick comments. I'd just like to highlight this panel that's very powerful. I learned a lot here, and it's very good when we learn something. Second point, I'd like to remind that in New York, Lula got a prize from Bill Gates, an award. And it was very interesting to see Bill Gates give him the award. And he said, it's very good for you to do philanthropy, but you know that the hunger in the world, states are going to solve, right? And it was very interesting to see him in this space talking about philanthropy. And Guga said, that's great, you can do that, but you're just a band-aid because those who are going to solve the problem are the states. So the role of the governments is fundamental. And the other comment is to reinforce what Henrique mentioned, because we won't be able to end hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity if we don't work to fight the structure inequalities, be it gender, race, ethnic. That's an important message that we need to tell. We need to fight these structural inequalities. And if we can't do that, we won't be able to deal and solve hunger and nutrition poverty. And that's it. It was great to be here with you all in this afternoon. I'm very happy. Thank you very much, Natalie. Fabrício. I would like to thank you again for the honor of being a part of this panel. I'm not gonna repeat what has been said. I'd just like to add, we were talking about the flow of trade of commodities in the international scenario, and we mentioned that many times we have a lot of conflict. We are exporting vegetable, plant protein very cheaply to countries so they can have animal feed at a low cost, and they produce the animal protein and they sell it within their countries, the meat, for very low price. Here we pay the price on the expansion of the commodities because of deforestation, the use of water, and that harms the microclimate and global climate, and we're the ones who are footing the bill. So we are giving food safety in a global scale, but we don't have it internally. This is something that we need to reflect on. Paula. Thank you very much, Fabrício. I'd like to thank you all. I'm going to end the panel here. I think there's a lot of things that need to happen at the same time, and it's very important. Who's going to solve the problem? I'd just like to mention something. One last thing to add is we need to be careful with the false technological solutions, this belief that the great corporations that are going to solve challenges we have in the world. I think it's quite the opposite. We need to increase the regulation capacity of the states, because the objective of the corporations is revenue, and unfortunately, in the system we have nowadays, it's revenue at any price. So while the global system continues to reward this type of behavior, we probably will not get the solution from them. And just the final warning, and this is something I've been saying since 2021, the private sector wants to be part of the solution. They should follow the rules and pay their taxes. Maybe we would be in a better place to face the challenges we have today. So I'd like to thank you all for being here, the speakers, the listeners. I apologize for the lack of the Q&A session individually, but I think we can continue to have this debate in these spaces we are all present in. I learned a lot with you all. I agree with Natalia. I learned a lot as well. I'd like to thank all of the organizations that were a part of the event and who are here taking care of the whole event in the background. Marina, Denise, Bruno, Mariana. Thank you very much, everyone.